Damian Russo slammed his palm on the conference table and laughed so hard his face turned red. "Bring the secretary," he said, wiping tears from his eyes. "Bring little Amelia to the Valenti dinner. Let her sit among wolves and see what happens." The other men laughed with him. Luca Moretti said nothing. He simply looked at his phone and typed one message to his assistant. "You are invited tonight. 8 o'clock. Formal." He never once considered what would happen when she walked through that door. Before we go any further, if you are watching this story right now, please take 1 second to subscribe to our channel and follow along until the very end. And drop a comment below telling us what city you are watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Now let's get into it. Amelia Hart had worked for Luca Moretti for 7 years, 3 months and 11 days. She knew that number because she counted every single one of them. Not out of love, not out of loyalty, out of discipline. She had given herself a deadline, and that deadline was tomorrow morning when she planned to place her resignation letter on Luca Moretti's desk before he arrived at 8 o'clock, before he poured his first cup of coffee, before he had time to ask a single question or offer a single negotiation. She had already packed the small box on her desk, a photograph of her mother, a spare pair of glasses, a notebook she had filled with 7 years of observations, written in a shorthand nobody else could read. 7 years. And not one person in that building truly knew who she was. That was the plan. That had always been the plan. But then Damian Russo opened his mouth and everything changed. The meeting had started at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Amelia sat in her usual chair, positioned just outside the inner circle of the conference table, close enough to take notes far enough that the men inside could pretend she wasn't there. 14 people sat around that table. CFOs, regional directors, 2 men whose titles didn't appear on any official company document, but whose presence made the security detail outside the building double in size. Luca Moretti sat at the head. He wore a charcoal gray suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. His dark hair was cut precisely. His jaw was set in that particular way it always was during meetings, not tense, not angry, simply closed, like a door that had been locked from the inside. He was 39 years old, and he had the kind of face that made people nervous without understanding why. Amelia understood why. It was the eyes. Luca Moretti's eyes never stopped calculating. Even when he smiled, which was rare, those eyes were doing something else entirely. Adding numbers. Measuring distances. Deciding how much a person was worth to him, and how quickly they could be replaced. She had watched him do it for 7 years. She had watched him do it to her. The meeting was about the shipping contracts. 3 routes along the eastern seaboard had shown irregular delivery patterns for the past 4 months. 2 of Luca's senior directors had already presented their analysis. Both of them had blamed outside factors. Supply chain disruption, port delays, international regulatory changes. Both of them were lying. Amelia knew they were lying because she had already found the truth 6 weeks ago, buried inside a quarterly logistics report that nobody had bothered to read because it was 43 pages long and didn't include a summary page. She had read all 43 pages, twice. She had found the discrepancies on page 31. Now she watched the 2 directors finish their presentations and sit back down with the satisfied expressions of men who believed they had successfully misdirected everyone in the room. She looked at Luca. He was nodding slowly. He didn't know yet. She reached into her folder. "Mr. Moretti." Her voice was quiet. It was always quiet. Not because she was timid, because she had learned long ago that quiet voices in loud rooms made people lean forward, made them pay a different kind of attention. The conversation at the table stopped. Several of the men looked at her with the particular expression she had seen so many times. It no longer affected her, a combination of mild irritation and dismissive curiosity. The expression people gave a clock on the wall that had suddenly started making noise. Luca turned his head. "The shipping reports have a problem," she said. She placed the document on the table and slid it toward him. Not toward the directors, not toward the CFO. Directly to Luca. He looked at the page she had marked. His eyes moved quickly the way they always did when he was reading something for the first time. Then they slowed. Then they stopped moving entirely. He read it again. The room was very quiet now. "Where did you find this?" he asked. "Quarterly Logistics Summary," she said. "Page 31. This report was filed 6 weeks ago." "Yes." "Why are we only seeing this now?" Amelia looked at him steadily. "Because nobody read page 31. Damien Russo laughed. It was a sharp, loud sound that broke the tension in the room the way a slap breaks silence abruptly and with an edge of cruelty. The secretary found a mistake. He leaned back in his chair and looked around the table with an expression of amused disbelief. 7 figures moving through ghost accounts, and it takes the woman who orders our lunch to notice." Several of the men smiled. Not all of them, but enough. Amelia did not react. She had practiced not reacting for 7 years. It was one of the most useful skills she had ever developed. Luca said nothing. He kept his eyes on the document. His jaw did that thing it did when he was processing something. He hadn't expected a slight tightening along the left side that most people never noticed because most people were watching his hands, not his face. Amelia had spent 7 years watching his face. "Good catch," Luca said finally. 2 words, that was all. The men around the table shifted. The topic moved forward. The directors began offering explanations for the discrepancy that were smooth and rehearsed and entirely false. Amelia wrote their explanations down in her notebook. She wrote down the names of the men who laughed. She wrote down the timestamp. Then Damien said the thing that changed her final day at Moretti Corporation from a quiet exit into something else entirely. "You know what would be genuinely entertaining," Damien said. He had a way of speaking that made every sentence sound like the beginning of a joke, like the entire world existed to provide him with material. "Tonight's dinner at the Valenti Club. The Bertolini group is flying in from Geneva. Very formal, very serious." He paused for effect. "We should bring Amelia." Nobody spoke for exactly 2 seconds. Then several men laughed, not all of them, but enough. "The overlooked secretary at a Valenti dinner," someone said. "That would be something. Can she even get into that building?" Another voice added. "She'd have to borrow a dress." More laughter. Amelia kept her face neutral. She was very good at keeping her face neutral. But something was happening in the center of her chest. A specific controlled kind of anger that she recognized immediately because she had felt it before. Not the hot, uncontrolled anger that made people act recklessly. The cold, focused kind. The kind that produced clarity instead of chaos. She looked at Luca. He was the only person in the room who hadn't laughed. He also hadn't stopped it. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't fully read, which was unusual, because she could read almost every expression he made. This one had something complicated in it. Something that might have been curiosity. Something that might have been a test. He picked up his phone. He typed something. 30 seconds later, Amelia's phone vibrated on the table beside her notepad. She glanced at the screen. "You are invited tonight. 8 o'clock. The Valenti Club. Formal attire." She looked up at him. Luca had already returned to the document on the table. The men around him were still laughing. Amelia looked at her phone again. She looked at the small box already packed on her desk. She thought about the resignation letter sitting in the top drawer, printed and signed, ready for tomorrow morning. She thought about 7 years. Then she put her phone in her pocket. "I'll be there," she said. Nobody heard her. Nobody was listening. That she thought was their first mistake. She had 45 minutes between the end of the meeting and when she needed to leave for the Valenti Club. She used 12 of those minutes sitting alone in the women's restroom on the 14th floor. Not because she was upset, but because she needed complete quiet to think. This had not been part of the plan. The plan had been clean. Simple. Walk in tomorrow morning. Place the letter on his desk. Walk out. Start the next chapter without drama, without confrontation, without giving any of these men the satisfaction of witnessing a reaction. But something about the way Damien had said it, "Bring little Amelia," had shifted something in her. Not the words themselves. She had heard worse. The timing. She was leaving anyway. She had already decided. She had nothing left to lose inside that building, which meant tonight, for the first time in 7 years, she could walk into a room full of Luca Moretti's colleagues and simply be herself. Not the shadow, not the woman who ordered coffee, not the person nobody noticed. Just Amelia. And she knew exactly what that would do to them. She pulled out her phone and made 2 calls. The first was to her friend Clara, who owed her a favor and had impeccable taste in everything. The second was to a man named Vincent, who had worked for a federal financial oversight committee until 4 years ago, when he retired, and who had been expecting her call for several months. "Tomorrow," she told Vincent. "I'll send everything tomorrow." "You're ready?" he asked. "Almost," she said. "One more night." She hung up, looked at herself in the mirror for a long moment. The glasses, the plain face, the careful, quiet posture. She had built this version of herself very deliberately. And tonight, she was going to let the people in that room see exactly what was underneath it. The Valenti Club occupied the top 2 floors of a building on 5th Avenue that didn't have a sign on the door. You either knew where it was, or you didn't belong there. Amelia knew where it was. She had made the reservation herself 6 months ago, when she first began to understand the full shape of what was happening inside the Moretti organization. She arrived at 7:52. The man at the entrance looked at her name on the list, looked at her, looked at the list again. "Miss Hart?" "Yes." He opened the door. The private dining room on the upper level was already occupied. Amelia stood at the entrance for a moment before anyone noticed her. She used that moment. She scanned the table. 14 people. Luca at the head again, though this version of the table was rounder, less hierarchical in its physical arrangement. Though everyone in the room still knew exactly where the power sat. Damien to Luca's right, already holding a glass of something amber. 3 men she recognized from the earlier meeting. 4 faces she didn't recognize, but had seen in photographs, the Bertolini group from Geneva, the foreign partners, who were the ostensible reason for tonight's dinner. And then the others. A woman in her 60s who Amelia recognized immediately as Senator Claire Hartwell's chief of staff, though she was not here in any official capacity. 2 men near the far end of the table who had the particular stillness of people whose professional lives required them to remain unnoticed in a room. Just like her. Interesting. Then Damien looked up, and the room changed. It didn't happen all at once. It happened the way awareness spreads through a room when something unexpected enters it, starting at one point and moving outward in a slow, unstoppable wave. Damien looked up and stopped speaking mid-sentence. The man next to him followed his gaze. Then the man beside him. By the time Amelia reached the table, the entire room was quiet. She had not done anything dramatic. She was wearing a dress black simple, the kind of thing that could be worn in a dozen different rooms without looking out of place in any of them. Clara had chosen it in 15 minutes and been exactly right. Her glasses were the same ones she wore every day. Her hair was down instead of pulled back, which was the only visible difference from how she appeared at the office. She had not tried to become someone else. She had simply stopped trying to become someone smaller. That was all. And somehow, that was everything. Luca Moretti stood up. She noticed it immediately because she had been watching him for 7 years, and she had never not once seen him stand when someone entered a room. He stood. And he did not appear to realize he had done it until he was already upright, at which point his expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a flicker of something she had never seen on his face before. Surprise. Luca Moretti was surprised. Damien was no longer smiling. Amelia sat down. She sat in the chair directly across from the Bertolini Group's lead representative, a thin man in his 50s named Michel Fontaine, who had been reaching for his wine glass when she entered and had not completed that motion yet. "Good evening," she said to the table. Not to Luca, not to Damien, to the table. "Miss Hart." Luca's voice was measured, careful, the way it got when he was calculating. "I'm glad you came." "You invited me," she said. Damien made a sound that might have been the beginning of a joke. It died before it became one. Across the table, Michel Fontaine leaned toward his colleague and said something in rapid, quiet French. He said, "She's only the assistant. Don't worry about it." His colleague responded, "Are you sure she doesn't look like an assistant?" Fontaine replied, "Trust me. Moretti brings her to all his informal meetings. She takes notes and fetches things. Pay her no attention." He said all of this with complete confidence because he was absolutely certain that nobody at the table spoke French well enough to follow. Amelia listened to every word. She reached for her water glass. She said nothing yet, because timing, she had learned, was everything. The dinner proceeded with a formality that was typical of rooms like this. Conversations that sounded social but were entirely strategic laughter that was calibrated to establish comfort without revealing vulnerability. The careful dance of powerful people deciding how much to trust each other. Amelia participated in none of it. She ate, she listened, she watched. Damien, she noticed, was drinking more than usual. He kept glancing at her with an expression that had started as amusement and was slowly becoming something else. Something that had more discomfort in it than he was willing to acknowledge. Luca kept his eyes on the table's conversation, but she could feel him tracking her, the way she had spent years tracking him peripherally, constantly, without appearing to do so. Two of the Bertolini Group's representatives were now speaking exclusively to each other, and they were speaking in French, and they were talking about the contract. Amelia listened to every word. At the 20-minute mark, Fontaine produced a document from his portfolio and slid it across the table toward Luca. "The revised partnership terms," he said in English, now smooth and practiced. "We've simplified the language to make the agreement more accessible, more friendly." He smiled. "Better for everyone." Luca picked up the document. He read it with the focused, rapid attention he gave everything. His CFO leaned over to review it as well. Damien poured himself another drink. Amelia looked at the document from across the table. She had read an earlier version of it 3 weeks ago, when a draft had been attached to an internal memo that was CC'd to her address by mistake, and that she had read in its entirety before anyone realized the error. The language in this version was different. She had expected that. The specific changes they had made were precisely the ones she would have made if she were trying to hide what the document actually did. She waited. Luca finished reading. He looked at Fontaine. "This looks straightforward." "Very much so," Fontaine said. "Clean terms, clear responsibilities. My legal team will review it before we finalize." "Of course." Fontaine nodded graciously. "Standard practice." Damien said, "The Bertolini Group has been our partners for 8 years. I think we can move on this without the usual delays." Luca considered it. Amelia put down her fork. "Mr. Moretti." Her voice was quiet. The table went still. "There is a clause in Section 14, she said, that transfers operational authority over the eastern shipping routes to the Joint Partnership Committee in the event of a quarterly revenue shortfall exceeding 12%. Silence. "The language looks like standard risk-sharing protocol," she continued. "It isn't. Combined with the definitions established in Section 3, Paragraph 7, which redefines operational authority to include personnel routing rights and contract renegotiation powers. What this clause actually does is give the Bertolini Group unilateral control over your entire Eastern operation if the quarterly numbers drop." More silence. "And the quarterly numbers," she said, "based on the shipping discrepancies I flagged this afternoon, the ones caused by activity that has been deliberately suppressing revenue in those specific routes for the past 4 months, will almost certainly drop below 12% within the next 2 quarters. The room was completely still. Fontaine's smile had not moved, but his eyes had. Amelia looked at him steadily. "Vous avez bien planifié cela," she said in clean, unaccented French. "You planned this very carefully." Fontaine stared at her. "Mais vous avez oublié quelque chose." "But you forgot something." She opened the folder she had placed beside her plate when she sat down. "You forgot that someone was reading the documents you didn't think anyone was reading." The room erupted. Not loudly. This was not the kind of room where people raised their voices. The eruption was the quieter, more dangerous kind. Rapid, urgent conversations that splintered simultaneously from every corner of the table. The sound of people rapidly recalculating everything they thought they understood about the past hour. Fontaine began speaking in rapid French to his colleagues. The CFO grabbed the contract and began flipping to section 14. Damien stood up. "This is completely inappropriate," he said, his voice carrying the specific tone of a man who had just had something important taken from him and was furious about it. "She is a secretary. She has no standing to—" "Sit down, Damien." Luca's voice. Quiet. Final. Damien sat. Luca had not looked at Damien when he said it. He was looking at the folder in front of Amelia. His eyes had that calculating quality again, the one she recognized, but there was something different in it now. Something that looked a great deal like reassessment. "Open the folder," he said to her. She did. He looked at the first page, then the second. She watched him read. She watched the exact moment he understood. Not just the Bertolini scheme. All of it. The shipping discrepancies. The ghost accounts. The 4 months of deliberate revenue suppression. And the signatures at the bottom of every internal authorization that had made all of it possible. He looked up from the folder. He looked at Damien. Damien Russo, who had been his closest friend for 22 years. Damien who had made the joke about bringing the secretary tonight. Damien whose name was on every page of the folder. The expression on Luca Moretti's face in that moment was one Amelia had never seen before and hoped she never had to see on anyone's face again. It was the expression of a man watching everything he thought was solid turn liquid under his feet. "Damien," Luca said. One word, just his name. Damien opened his mouth. Nothing came out. And Amelia Hart, the woman nobody had ever truly noticed, closed her folder, placed her hands in her lap, and waited. Because she had been waiting for 7 years. She could wait a little longer. Damien Russo did not say anything for a very long time. That was the thing nobody at the table expected, because Damien always had something to say. That was his gift, and his armor, and his most reliable weapon, the ability to fill any silence with words that redirected, reframed, and reset the conversation until people forgot what they had originally been asking about. He had done it in boardrooms. He had done it in back rooms. He had done it to judges and senators and men who made other men disappear. But he sat at that table and looked at his name on those pages and said absolutely nothing. Luca waited. He was extraordinarily good at waiting. Most people who knew him only by reputation thought his power came from the speed of his decisions. The people who actually knew him understood that his real power was patience. He could sit in complete silence longer than anyone in the room was comfortable with, and he knew that silence, when applied correctly, extracted more truth than any question. He waited now. And finally Damien said, "Those documents are incomplete." Luca did not respond. "You're looking at partial records." Damien continued, his voice, finding its footing now, gaining the particular smoothness that Amelia had observed in him before the smoothness that appeared when he had decided to perform his way out of a situation rather than fight his way out. Without the context of the full accounting trail, those numbers look. "The full accounting trail is on page 9, Amelia said. She did not say it loudly. She said it the way she said most things, quietly, precisely, without any visible emotion attached to it. Damien turned his head and looked at her with an expression that had finally fully abandoned any pretense of amusement. "Page 9, Luca said. He turned to page 9. He read it. The CFO, who had been silent for the past 4 minutes, leaned over and read it alongside him. The CFO's name was Gerald Park, and he was 61 years old and had worked for the Moretti organization for 19 years, and Amelia had spent considerable time in the past several months trying to determine whether Gerald was complicit or simply oblivious. She had concluded oblivious. She watched Gerald's face now and confirmed it. The color that left his cheeks was the color of a man seeing something. For the first time, not the color of a man watching something he had helped build be exposed. "This is a transfer record," Gerald said slowly. "Yes," Amelia said. "These funds went through the Palmetto account." "Yes." The Palmetto account was supposed to be closed in February. It was not closed in February. Gerald looked at Damien. Damien was still looking at Amelia. "Who authorized it to remain open?" Gerald asked. Nobody answered him because the authorization signature was visible on the same page, and everyone who was reading it could see exactly whose name it was. Fontaine and his colleagues had gone very quiet at the far end of the table. Amelia had noticed them shifting slightly in the past few minutes, the subtle practiced repositioning of people calculating their exit routes. Not physical exit routes, narrative ones. The Bertolini group had come to this dinner expecting to walk away with a signed agreement that would have given them operational control of Luca Moretti's entire Eastern shipping network within 18 months. What they had walked into instead was a different kind of room entirely, and they were now reassessing with great speed how deeply implicated they needed to appear. Fontaine cleared his throat. "Perhaps," he said carefully in English, "this is a conversation held between the Moretti organization's internal parties." Luca looked at him. Just looked at him. Fontaine picked up his wine glass. Put it back down without drinking from it. "You're not going anywhere," Luca said. It was not a threat. It was information. Fontaine received it as such. Luca turned back to Damien. 22 years, he said. 2 words, just the number. And somehow those 2 words landed in the room with more weight than anything else that had been said all evening, because everyone at the table understood what they meant. Not just the duration of the friendship, the entire architecture of it. The trust that had been built year by year, decision by decision, crisis by crisis. The number of times Luca had made a choice based on Damien's counsel. The number of times Damien had sat across a table from an enemy, and Luca had known with complete certainty that Damien was on his side. 22 years. "Luca," Damien started. "How long?" Damien closed his mouth. "How long has the Palmetto account been active?" Silence. Damien. 14 months, Damien said. The number dropped into the room like a stone into still water. 14 months. The ripples moved outward and touched every person at the table, and each of them registered what it meant. 14 months was not an impulse. 14 months was a plan. Gerald made a sound that was not quite a word. One of the men from the earlier meeting stood up from his chair involuntarily, then seemed to realize what he had done and sat back down. Luca did not move. 14 months, he repeated. It wasn't... Damien stopped, started again. The organization was losing ground in the eastern routes. The Bertolini group approached me. They had a restructuring proposal that would have strengthened our position, but the terms required you to funnel our revenue into their preliminary account for 14 months, so that our quarterly numbers would hit the threshold in Section 14. Luca's voice was very even. So that they could trigger the operational transfer clause. He paused. So that they would own our shipping network. So that we could renegotiate from a position of, don't. Luca said it softly. Don't do that. Damien went quiet. You were going to sell my roots. I was trying to save the organization. You were trying to save yourself. Luca picked up the folder again. Because if the Bertolini Group controls the Eastern Network, your consulting fee from that arrangement. He found the pay is listed here at $4,200,000 paid in 3 installments to an account in your wife's maiden name. The room was absolutely silent. Amelia watched Damien Russo in that silence and saw something she had not expected to see. Not guilt. She had anticipated guilt. What she saw instead was something more complex. A man who had genuinely convinced himself at some point in the past 14 months that what he was doing was reasonable, that he had earned it, that the organization owed it to him, that Luca, with all of his power and all of his money and all of the things Damien had helped him build, would not really miss it. She had seen that look before. She had seen it on the face of the man who had destroyed her career 8 years ago. The man who had taken her fraud report buried it, and then quietly ensured that every firm in the city understood she was a problem employee who fabricated findings and couldn't be trusted. She had spent 8 years understanding that look, which was why when she had first seen it on Damien Russo's face 4 months ago, not during a meeting, not during a confrontation, but in a hallway, when he passed her without seeing her. When he was on the phone, and his expression was unguarded, and she recognized it immediately, she had started building this folder. She had not known then exactly what she would do with it. Now she knew. Luca placed the folder on the table. He straightened it with 2 fingers so that its edges were perfectly aligned with the edge of the table. Then he said very quietly, "Get out of my building." Damien stared at him. "Damien?" Luca did not raise his voice. "Get out of my building. We will discuss the legal implications through counsel. If you attempt to contact any of our clients, partners, or employees before that process is complete, I will not be the person handling that conversation." He paused. "Do you understand what I mean by that?" The color had completely left Damien's face. "Luca, we've been friends since—" "I know how long we've been friends. This is not what it looks like. You just told me it has been 14 months. Damien had no answer for that, because there was no answer for that. He had confessed the timeline himself, and the timeline was what made every other explanation impossible. He stood up. He looked around the table at the faces that were carefully not looking back at him. He looked at Amelia last, and what she saw in that look was not hatred exactly. It was something more specific, the look of a man trying to understand how he had been undone by the person he had never once considered a threat. She met his eyes steadily. She did not say anything. She didn't need to. He walked out of the room. The door closed. And then the room exhaled. Gerald Park put both hands flat on the table and appeared to be deciding whether or not he was going to be sick. Fontaine reached for his wine glass again. This time he actually drank from it. Luca did not look at either of them. He was looking at the folder in front of Amelia with the expression of a man who was still in the process of understanding the full dimensions of what he was looking at. "Miss Hart," he said. "Yes." "How long have you been building this?" She considered the question. "Which part?" she asked. He looked up at her. "The folder," he said. "The evidence against Damien and the Bertolini group." 4 months, she said. "And the rest?" The question sat in the air between them. The rest. He was asking, she understood not about the folder. He was asking about everything before the folder. The 7 years. The quiet observations. The documents she had read that no one else read. The patterns she had identified in data that everyone else had dismissed as administrative noise. How was asking, she realized whether he had been managed. "I've been doing my job," she said. "For 7 years." It was the truest answer she had. He studied her face for a long moment. Then he looked at Fontaine, and the room shifted again, because now Luca Moretti turned the full weight of his attention toward the man at the end of the table who had come to New York to participate in the theft of his organization, and the expression on Luca's face in that moment was the one that had made business leaders and criminal organizations and men who should have known better decide that being on the wrong side of Luca Moretti was a category of mistake from which not everyone recovered. Fontaine set down his wine glass very carefully. "Monsieur Moretti," he began. "In English," Luca said. "Please." Fontaine looked briefly at Amelia. "In English," Luca repeated. "The arrangement with Mr. Russo was initiated by his approach to us," Fontaine said. He had found his composure again. He was a practiced man. He had been in difficult rooms before. "We responded to an opportunity that was presented. The terms of our involvement are documented," Luca said, "on pages 12 through 15 of that folder." Fontaine glanced at the folder. "My organization's exposure in this matter," he said carefully, "is a question that I would prefer to address through our respective legal representatives." "That is your right," Luca said, "and you will exercise that right. But before you leave this room and begin the process of distancing yourself from this arrangement, I want you to understand something." He leaned forward slightly. "The routes you were trying to acquire through Section 14 generate 40% of this organization's Eastern revenue. They connect to 17 ports. They employ between direct and contracted labor over 400 people." He paused. "You were not buying a contract. You were buying the livelihoods of 400 people who have never heard your name. And you were doing it through a scheme that required active betrayal from inside my organization." Another pause. I want you to understand that I know that, and that I will remember it." The room was completely still. Fontaine said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, "We will be in touch through counsel." "Yes," Luca said. "You will." Fontaine and his 3 colleagues stood. They moved toward the door with the controlled, deliberate pace of people who wanted very much to move faster, but understood that running would be an admission. The door opened. The door closed. And then there were only a few people left in the room. Luca Gerald, 2 of the men from the earlier meeting, who handled the aspects of the Moretti organization that didn't appear in its public filings, and Amelia. Gerald Park looked at the folder. He looked at Luca. "How much did we lose?" he asked. "The exact figure is on page 8, Amelia said. "Gross diversion over 14 months accounting for the revenue suppression in the eastern routes comes to approximately 11.4 million. Gerald made the sound again, the one that was not quite a word. "Recoverable?" Luca asked her. "Most of it," she said. "The Palmetto account has approximately 6.2 million remaining. The rest moved through 3 additional accounts. I have the routing information." She produced another page from the folder and placed it on the table. 2 of those accounts are in jurisdictions with existing treaty agreements with the United States. Recovery through legal channels is realistic. The third is more complicated. Luca looked at the page. He looked at the 2 men at the far end of the table, the ones whose professional lives required them to remain unnoticed. They were already looking at the page. "We'll handle the third," one of them said. Amelia did not ask what that meant. She had spent 7 years understanding exactly what things meant inside the Moretti organization, and she had learned that the understanding was not always useful to have verbalized. Gerald pulled the folder toward him and began reading it from the beginning with the focused, slightly dazed attention of a man taking inventory of damage he had not known existed. Luca leaned back in his chair. He looked at the ceiling for a moment. It was something she had seen him do occasionally in moments of private processing. The brief upward glance, as if the ceiling offered some perspective that the room itself did not. Then he looked at her. "You were going to resign tomorrow," he said. It was not a question. She felt something shift in her chest. "What makes you say that?" she asked. "The box on your desk," he said. "The photograph of your mother. The spare glasses. I saw it when I came out of the 2 o'clock meeting." She had not known he had seen it. She filed that away. The fact that Luca Moretti noticed more than she had credited him for, which meant he was either more aware of her than he had ever indicated, or the box had simply caught his eye in passing. She was not yet sure which interpretation was correct. "I had planned to resign tomorrow," she confirmed. He absorbed this. "Before or after you sent the folder to wherever you were going to send it?" Another pause. "After," she said. "Who were you sending it to?" She looked at him steadily. "The appropriate people." Something moved across his face. Not quite anger, something adjacent to it, the specific discomfort of a man who understood that someone in his organization had been prepared to go over his head, and who was trying to determine whether he was angry about that, or whether he recognized on some level that it was the correct decision. "You were going to give this to federal oversight," he said. "The financial crimes in this folder are federal matters," she said. "The revenue diversion, the fraudulent account activity, the conspiracy with a foreign business group to acquire domestic commercial assets through deliberate financial manipulation. I know what the crimes are. Then you know why the information needed to go to people with authority to act on it. You could have come to me." Amelia looked at him. She did not say anything for a moment, because what she wanted to say required more care than what she would have said if she were not choosing her words deliberately. "Mr. Moretti," she said, "every significant discovery I have brought to your attention in 7 years has been received with 2 words, and then redirected to the next agenda item. I have placed documents on your desk that identified problems in this organization before those problems became crises. I have corrected translations in meetings that would have cost this company contracts. I have read reports that nobody else read because nobody else thought it was worth the time." She paused. "And every time I did those things, I was the woman who ordered the coffee. I was the office shadow. I was the person your colleagues placed bets about in terms of what I would be wearing to a formal dinner." She did not raise her voice. She kept it exactly as steady as it always was. The question of why I did not come to you first is a question I would like you to sit with for a while. Silence. Long, complete, unbroken silence. Gerald Park had stopped reading the folder. The two men at the far end of the table were very still. Luca did not look away from her. He did not offer a defense. He did not redirect. He simply sat with what she had said the way she had asked him to, and she watched something move behind his eyes that she had not seen there before. Not the calculation, not the assessment, but something rawer than that. Something that might, in a different man, have been called the beginning of understanding. "You're right," he said. 2 words. The same number of words he had given her that afternoon in the conference room. But these 2 words were entirely different. She held them for a moment. Let them land. Then she reached into her folder one final time and placed the last document on the table. Not a financial record, not a routing report, not an accounting trail. A letter, her resignation letter, dated tomorrow's date, signed in her careful handwriting. She placed it in front of Luca Moretti. "I brought it with me," she said, "because I wanted to give it to you in person." He looked at the letter. He looked at her. "Amelia." "I didn't want to leave it on your desk," she said. "That felt incomplete. After 7 years, you deserve to hear it directly." He did not touch the letter. "I am not going to accept this," he said. "You don't have a choice," she said. "I always have a choice." "So do I," she said. "That's the point." The 2 men at the far end of the table exchanged a glance. Gerald Park looked at the ceiling. Luca looked at the resignation letter for a long time without speaking. And in the silence, something was happening that Amelia had not fully anticipated when she packed her small box and rehearsed this moment in her mind over the past several weeks. She had expected relief. She had expected the clean, weightless feeling of a decision that has already been made and simply needs to be executed. What she felt instead was more complicated than that, because the man sitting across from her was not responding the way she had expected him to respond. The powerful men she had encountered before, when confronted with the exit of someone they had underestimated, typically moved through a predictable sequence: dismissal, then recalculation, then an offer, then pressure, then a version of the offer that was slightly more generous with an undercurrent of controlled threat beneath the generosity. Luca was not doing any of that. He was sitting very still. And he was looking at her resignation letter with an expression that she was struggling to categorize because it was not calculation. It was not strategy. It looked, if she were being honest with herself, like a man staring at something he had broken and was only now understanding the full value of. "You knew about the Bertolini contract," he said. "You knew about Damien. You knew about the Palmetto account. You knew about all of it for months." "Yes." "And you still came tonight?" "Yes." "Why?" The question was genuine. She had prepared for many questions tonight. She had not, she realized, fully prepared for that one. "Because they laughed," she said. He waited. "This afternoon in that meeting room, they laughed at the idea that I might matter. And I have let rooms full of people believe that I don't matter for 7 years because it was useful to me. Because it kept me unnoticed while I did the work I needed to do." She stopped, looked at the resignation letter. "But I decided that the last thing I did inside the Moretti organization was not going to be a disappearing act. I did not want to simply vanish. I wanted them to see me, once, before I left." She looked at him. "And I wanted you to see me too." Luca was very still. "I see you," he said. It was the simplest thing he had said all evening, and somehow it undid 7 years of careful composure in a way that nothing else in that room had managed. She did not show it. She was extraordinarily good at not showing things. But it landed. It landed in the place where she had kept very carefully for a very long time, the specific ache of a person who has spent years being invisible by choice, and has sometimes, in the quieter moments, wondered whether anyone would notice if she stopped choosing it. "I see you," he said again. "I should have seen you a long time ago." She looked at the resignation letter between them. She did not pick it up. He did not pick it up either. It sat there in the space between them, between what had been and what came next. And neither of them said anything else for a very long moment. Gerald Park quietly closed the folder. Outside somewhere in the building, a door opened and closed, and Amelia Hart, the woman nobody had truly noticed for 7 years, sat in the room where she had finally completely allowed herself to be seen, and felt the careful, controlled world she had built around herself tremble slightly at its foundations. Not because it was falling, because something was shifting. And she did not yet know, sitting in that room with her resignation letter on the table and Luca Moretti's eyes on her face, whether she was ready for what came next. The resignation letter stayed on the table. Neither of them moved to take it. Gerald Park eventually excused himself with a quiet word about needing to reach the legal team tonight, and the two men at the far end of the table followed him out with the practiced efficiency of people who understood when a room needed to become smaller. The door closed behind them with a soft final click. And then it was just the two of them. Luca Moretti and Amelia Hart, sitting across from each other in a private dining room that smelled of expensive food and the specific tension of a conversation that had not yet finished becoming what it was going to be. Luca poured 2 glasses of water. He pushed one toward her. She took it. "Tell me about before," he said. She looked at him. "Before Moretti Corporation," he said. "You said you were a financial analyst. You said you exposed corruption, and they destroyed your reputation." He paused. "Tell me what actually happened." She had not planned to tell him this part. She had planned to leave the folder, hand over the resignation letter, and walk out with the contained dignity of someone who had finished a job and chosen to move on. She had not planned on sitting in an empty room with Luca Moretti at 10 o'clock at night, drinking water, being asked questions she had not answered for anyone in 8 years. But the resignation letter was still on the table. And he was still asking. "I worked for Hartfield Capital," she said. "Asset management. I was a junior analyst, 26 years old. I had been there 18 months. She turned the water glass slowly in her hands. "I found a pattern in the fund allocation reports. Small withdrawals spread across dozens of client accounts. Individually, none of them would trigger an audit flag. Collectively, over 30 months, they totaled approximately $22 million, redirected to a series of accounts connected to 3 of the firm's senior partners." Luca was very still. "I documented everything," she said. "I spent 3 weeks building a complete evidentiary record. I brought it to my direct supervisor." She paused. "He was one of the 3 partners." The pause that followed was the kind that had weight in it. "I didn't know that when I walked into his office," she said. "I found out approximately 48 hours later when the firm's HR director called me into a meeting and informed me that I was being terminated for data falsification and unauthorized access to client records." Luca said nothing. 2 of the other firms I interviewed with over the next 4 months received calls from Hartfield's legal team before my second interview in each case. She set the glass down. "It took me 6 months to understand the full scope of what they had done to my professional record. It took me another year to accept that fighting it through conventional channels was going to cost me everything I had left and produce nothing." She looked at him evenly. "So I changed my approach. You disappeared," Luca said. "I became someone nobody would think to protect themselves from," she said. "And then I found a position where I could observe a large, complex organization from the inside, from a vantage point that nobody would think to guard. My organization," he said. "You were not my original target," she said. "When I applied for the secretarial position at Moretti Corporation, I was looking for proximity to 3 specific individuals who had done business with Hartfield Capital during the period of the fraud. I believed there was a wider network. I believed the money hadn't simply disappeared inside the firm." She paused. "I was right. But what I found when I got inside your organization was more complicated than what I had gone looking for." "Because we were dirty," he said. "It wasn't a question." "Because some of the people around you were dirty," she said with a precision that was not accidental. "And because you were running an organization large enough and complex enough that you couldn't see all of it from where you were standing." He absorbed this. "And the people connected to Hartfield Capital," he said. "They appear in the folder," she said. "Pages 19 through 23. The connection to the Palmetto account scheme is indirect but documentable. The original Hartfield fraud and what Damien Russo built 14 months ago share three of the same intermediary accounts. Luca stared at her. She watched him process the specific dawning comprehension of a man realizing that the betrayal inside his organization had roots that went deeper and older than 14 months. That the network around his closest friend was connected to a fraud that had destroyed a young analyst's career 8 years ago. That the woman he had allowed his colleagues to dismiss as office furniture had spent 7 years untangling a web that reached all the way back to a corner office in a midtown asset management firm. Damien knew about Hartfield Capital, Luca said slowly. Damien introduced 2 of the Hartfield partners to your shipping division 4 years ago, she said. They consulted on route restructuring for 11 months. The consulting arrangement was dissolved officially. The relationship was not. Luca put both hands flat on the table. He stared at the space between them. She watched the muscle along his jaw do the thing it did. You have been in my building for 7 years, he said, holding evidence of a fraud that connects to my organization waiting. Building a complete picture, she said. Yes. And tonight was going to be the end of it. Tomorrow morning was going to be the end of it. Tonight was... She stopped. Tonight was what? She considered how honest to be. She decided to be completely honest because she was leaving anyway, and because the resignation letter was still on the table, and because something about the way he was looking at her made dishonesty feel like a waste of the only conversation they had ever truly had. Tonight was personal, she said. The folder was always going to the appropriate authorities. That was the plan regardless. But when Damien made that joke this afternoon, I decided that I wanted one moment where the people who had spent 7 years treating me like furniture understood what that furniture had been doing the entire time. Luca looked at her for a long time. That's not the only reason you came tonight, he said. It was not a question either. She did not answer it. He didn't press. Some questions she was beginning to understand. He asked not because he needed the answer, but because he wanted the other person to know he already had it. He reached out and picked up her resignation letter. He read it, though it was only 3 sentences long. He read it the way he read everything carefully, completely, without performing the act of reading. Then he folded it in half. He placed it in his jacket pocket. You can't keep that, she said. You can write another one, he said. Mr. Moretti. Luca, he said. She stopped. In 7 years he had never asked her to use his first name. She looked at him. He looked back. You have spent 7 years calling me Mr. Moretti, he said. I have spent 7 years allowing people to treat you as invisible. I think we can both agree that we're past the formal arrangement. She did not know what to do with that. She reached for her water glass instead. The folder needs to go to Vincent Carr at the Financial Oversight Division, she said. He is expecting my call tomorrow. I gave him a partial briefing several months ago. He has been building a parallel case on the Hartfield Capital matter. What I have here completes it. Luca nodded slowly. I won't obstruct that, he said. She had not been certain he would say that. She had been prepared for a negotiation for an offer of a private settlement, for a quiet resolution that kept federal investigators out of his organization entirely. Many men in his position would have made that offer without hesitation. The organization's cooperation, she said, will matter significantly to how the investigation is framed. I know, he said. There are aspects of the Moretti organization's activity that will come under scrutiny during a federal review of the financial records. I know that too. You're not going to fight it. I'm going to manage it, he said. There's a difference. He paused. And I'm going to need someone who understands the full scope of what's in that folder to help me manage it. She recognized what he was doing. That's not a reason to stay, she said. It's one reason, he said. It's not the only one I have. What are the others? He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You asked me to sit with a question earlier tonight. The question of why you didn't come to me first. Why you built the entire thing independently instead of bringing it to me when you found it. Yes, she said. I've been sitting with it. She waited. The answer, he said slowly, is that you had no reason to trust me. Not because I was corrupt, but because I was careless. I had all the information I needed to see you, and I chose not to look." He said it without any of the deflection she had expected. No qualifications, no reframing. "I allowed the people around me to define your value because it was easier than doing that work myself. And when you showed me things, I took them and moved forward, and never once asked what it had cost you to find them." He looked at the table. "That's a failure of leadership. And it's a failure of something more basic than that." She was very still. "You deserved better," he said. "Not because of what you found in those folders. You deserved better from the first week you worked in that building before you had found anything at all." The room was completely quiet. Amelia Hart had spent 8 years building a wall around the specific wound that Hartfield Capital had made in her. Not the professional damage, not the financial setback, but the deeper injury. The one that happened when she had done exactly the right thing and the world had punished her for it. She had built the wall carefully brick by brick, using discipline and observation, and the satisfying controlled work of building an airtight case from the inside of a system that had learned to ignore her. The wall had served her. It had protected her. It had allowed her to function, to focus, to finish what she had started. She had not anticipated that 7 words from a man she was in the process of leaving would find the seam in it. "You deserved better" from the first week. She did not cry. She had not cried in a professional context in 8 years, and she was not going to start now. But something moved in her chest that required a moment of management, and she used that moment to look at the water glass and breathe slowly and remind herself of all the reasons the resignation letter was the correct decision. The reasons were still there. They were simply sitting next to something else now. "I appreciate that," she said when she was certain her voice was steady. "I don't want your appreciation," he said. "I want to know what it would take." What would take? "To make this right," he said. "Not just the position, not the folder, the 7 years." He looked at her directly. What would it take to make that right? It was the most honest question anyone in a position of power had ever asked her. She thought about it seriously. Because he was asking seriously, and she owed him a serious answer, even if the answer ultimately led her to the same door she had already been planning to walk through. "I don't think you can make 7 years right," she said. "I don't think that's how it works. You can't return time. You can't undo the meetings where I was furniture. You can't give back the years I spent being invisible when I didn't necessarily want to be." She paused. "But what you can do, what would actually mean something, is change the room. Not for me specifically. For the next person who sits outside that conference table and knows things nobody is listening to." Luca looked at her. "Tell me how," he said. And that was when the conversation shifted into something neither of them had walked into the Valenti Club expecting. They talked for an hour and 40 minutes. Not about the folder. Not about Damien. Not about the federal investigation or the Bertolini Group or the 11.4 million in diverted funds. They talked about the organization, about the structures that had allowed Damien's scheme to operate undetected for 14 months. About the gaps in oversight that a well-positioned person could exploit. About the culture that had developed over years in which certain people's observations were weighted by their title rather than their accuracy. Luca asked questions. Real questions. The kind that required him to know things he did not yet know and to admit that he did not know them. Amelia answered every one. She found herself drawing on 7 years of accumulated observation. Not just the fraud, not just the financial irregularities, but the organizational patterns, the decision-making dynamics, the places where the Moretti Corporation was genuinely strong, and the places where it was more fragile than it appeared from the outside. She had never said any of this out loud before. She had written some of it in her notebook in her private shorthand that nobody else could read. But she had never spoken it to another person, certainly not to the person at the center of it. It felt strange. It felt, she realized, like exhaling after holding her breath for a very long time. At some point, Luca ordered coffee. She didn't remember when. At some point, the conversation moved from the organization's structure to something harder to categorize, the space where professional analysis ended and something more personal began. Not intimacy exactly, but honesty, which was its own kind of closeness. "Why financial analysis?" he asked. Originally, before Hartfield. She hadn't expected the question. My mother, she said. She was very good with money, not in a professional sense, in the practical sense. We didn't have much when I was growing up, and she made what we had go further than it should have been able to. She had this ability to see the underlying structure of a budget, where the waste was, where the real value was, where you could move things around and create stability from instability. She paused. I found out in my first accounting class in college that what she did was essentially forensic financial analysis. She called it common sense. Something crossed Luca's face, something that was not calculation. She sounds like someone worth knowing, he said. She was, Amelia said. He didn't ask the follow-up question. He simply nodded, and she found unexpectedly that she was grateful for that. The photograph in the box on your desk, he said. Yes, she said. He nodded again. They were quiet for a moment. When I was building this organization, he said, my father told me that the most dangerous people in any room are the ones nobody is watching. He meant it as a warning about enemies. He looked at the folder. He was right. He just had the wrong category of person in mind. She looked at him. You are the most dangerous person I have ever had in my organization, he said. Not because of what you found, because of what you are, because of the way you think and the way you work, and the way you walked into this room tonight and dismantled a 14-month conspiracy over dinner without raising your voice once. She held that. That is not a reason to stay, she said. No, he said. But it's a reason I'm going to ask you to. You're going to ask me? Yes. Not offer, not negotiate. Ask. Yes. She studied him. Why does that distinction matter to you? She asked. Because you told me tonight that you wanted a table where you were invited because your voice matters, he said. Not a better chair, a different table. He paused. I'm asking if you'll help me build it. The room was very quiet. Amelia looked at the space where her resignation letter had been. She looked at the folder. She looked at the man across the table from her, who had spent the past 2 hours being more genuinely honest with her than anyone in a position of power had been since the morning she walked into her supervisor's office at Hartfield Capital with a document that should have changed everything. I'm not your secretary, she said. I know, he said. I'm not your employee in any conventional sense. If I'm in that organization, I have real authority, real accountability, not a better title for the same invisible work. Agreed. I will report the folder to Vincent Carr regardless. The federal investigation moves forward. I would not have it any other way. The organization's cooperation needs to be full and documented. I'll instruct Gerald tonight, and if I find something in the future, anything, I am not going to be the woman sitting outside the conference room anymore. You are never walking into that building as anything other than an equal, he said. I will put that in writing, tonight, whatever form you need it to take. She was quiet for a long time. Outside the city, did what it always did, moved, breathed, went on without them, indifferent to the conversation happening in this room that was quietly rearranging the architecture of both their lives. I need to think, she said. That's fair, he said. I mean, I need more than tonight. I know. She reached across the table. She picked up her water glass and finished it. She stood. He stood too, automatically. The same way he had stood when she entered the room without seeming to realize he had done it until he was already upright. She noticed it again. I'll call you, she said. Whenever you're ready, he said. She picked up her empty folder, the one that had held 7 years of careful work and was now in the hands of the man whose organization it concerned, and she walked toward the door. She stopped. Luca, she said. He looked at her. It was the first time she had used his name. The effect was subtle, a slight shift in his posture, a thing that moved behind his eyes that she catalogued and did not yet know what to do with. You said you should have seen me a long time ago, she said. Yes, he said. Why didn't you? He was quiet for a moment. Because I was looking for strength in the places I expected to find it, he said. And you were standing somewhere I wasn't looking. She held that. That's an honest answer, she said. I'm working on honest, he said. She looked at him for one more moment. Then she walked out. The door closed behind her, and Luca Moretti stood in the empty dining room with a folded resignation letter in his jacket pocket and the specific, unfamiliar sensation of a man who has spent his entire adult life being the most powerful person in every room. He enters suddenly and completely unsure of what came next. It was not a comfortable feeling, but sitting under the discomfort quieter and more insistent was something else. Something that had the feeling of a door opening rather than closing. He reached into his pocket and felt the folded edge of the resignation letter. He left it there. He picked up his phone and the folded edge of the resignation letter. He left it there. He picked up his phone and called Gerald. Full cooperation, he said when Gerald answered. Everything Amelia Hart has documented goes to federal oversight. We do not obstruct, we do not delay, we do not negotiate around it. Full cooperation starting tomorrow morning. Gerald was quiet for a moment. That's going to open up parts of the organization that... I know what it will open up, Luca said. Do it anyway. He hung up. He stood in the empty room for a moment longer. Then he walked out into the night, and somewhere across the city. Amelia Hart was in a cab, her empty folder on the seat beside her, her phone in her hand, a message half-typed to Vincent Carr that she would finish tomorrow. Her mind moving through the conversation at a speed that she recognized the rapid, precise processing of a person who has all the data but hasn't yet arrived at the conclusion. She deleted the half-typed message. She put her phone in her bag. She looked out the window at the city going past. She thought about her mother, who had made something from nothing, using nothing but the ability to see what other people missed. She thought about the box on her desk with the photograph in it. She thought about a table where she was invited because her voice mattered. She thought about the man who had stood up without realizing he was doing it twice in the same evening. And she thought about the fact that in 7 years of watching Luca Moretti, of reading every expression and measuring every reaction and cataloging every decision he made, she had never once seen him ask for anything. Not request, not negotiate, not offer incentive. Ask. He had asked her. The cab moved through the city. Amelia Hart sat with what that meant, and the night went on around her full of noise and light, and the endless indifferent motion of a world that did not know that something had shifted, that a conversation had happened in a quiet room that was still even now working out what it had changed. She did not call him the next day. She did not call him the day after that either. She called Vincent Carr instead at 7:45 in the morning, before the city had fully woken up, and she sent him the complete folder by secure transfer before 8 o'clock. Vincent answered on the second ring, which told her he had been waiting. He always answered on the second ring when he was expecting something important, not the first, because the first ring was too eager, and not the third, because the third was too casual. Vincent Carr was a man who understood the weight of timing in a way that had made him extraordinary at his job for 31 years. "It's complete," he asked. "Everything," she said. "The Palmetto account trail, the Bertolini connection, the Hartfield Capital intermediary, accounts, the routing records for the diverted funds, and the authorization signatures on every transfer." Vincent was quiet for a moment. "Amelia," he said, "this is 8 years of work." "7 on the inside," she said. 8 total. "Are you all right?" She was sitting at the kitchen table in her apartment with a cup of coffee she hadn't touched yet, still in the clothes she had slept in, which was unusual, because she was almost never the kind of person who slept in her clothes. "I'm fine," she said. "I'm very fine. Moretti's organization is cooperating. He gave the instruction to his CFO last night. You should be receiving formal confirmation this morning." That's unexpected." "Yes," she said. "It is." After she hung up with Vincent, she sat at the table for a long time without moving. The box from her office was on the counter. She had brought it home last night without thinking too much about it, the automatic movement of someone executing a plan that was already in motion. Her mother's photograph was on top. She looked at it for a while. Her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. "The cooperation letter has been sent to Vincent Carr's office." I also had Gerald compile a complete disclosure of all financial records connected to the Palmetto account for the past 3 years. You should be copied on the transmission. She read it twice. He had copied her, not because she needed to be copied. She was no longer employed by the Moretti organization. Her resignation letter was in his jacket pocket, which was irregular as a matter of HR protocol, but was also, she acknowledged, more or less binding. He had copied her because he wanted her to see that he was doing what he said he would do. She put the phone down. She looked at her mother's photograph. She picked the phone back up. Received. Thank you. She paused. Then she added, "The disclosure is more complete than required. That will matter to how the investigation is framed." Another pause. Then, it was the right call. She sent it before she could edit it further. His response came in 40 seconds. "I'm learning." She put the phone face down on the table and finished her coffee. She did not go back to sleep. She sat at that table and thought for the first time in 8 years about what came next. Not the case, not the folder, not the careful structured work of the next phase, but the broader question, the one she had been too focused and too purposeful to examine closely for the better part of a decade. What did Amelia Hart actually want? Not the answer she gave in professional contexts. Not the strategic answer, or the measured answer, or the answer that kept her plans protected and her intentions unreadable. What did she actually want? The question sat with her through this morning. It did not resolve itself neatly, but by the afternoon, she knew one thing clearly: she was not ready to disappear again. Not into another quiet role in another large organization. Not into the next chapter of a plan designed primarily around what she needed to expose rather than what she wanted to build. She had been building toward an ending for 8 years. Now she was standing on the other side of it, and the ending looked unexpectedly like a beginning. Her phone buzzed again. Not Luca this time. A number she recognized from the Moretti Corporation's main line. She answered. "Miss Hart." It was Gerald Park. His voice had the specific quality of a man who had not slept well and was running on competence rather than comfort. "I hope I am not disturbing you." "You're not," she said. I feel it's important that I say something directly." He stopped. Started again. "I reviewed the full folder this morning. All 27 pages. I went back through the quarterly reports for the past 3 years with that information." He paused again. "I owe you a significant apology." She had not expected that. "Gerald, I am the CFO," he said. "The discrepancies were in my domain. You brought the shipping report to that meeting yesterday, and I sat at that table and said nothing. Not because I knew. I want to be clear. I did not know about the Palmetto account. I did not know about Damien's arrangement. But I should have known. It was my job to know. And instead, I sat at a table for 7 years and called you the woman who ordered the coffee." His voice was steady, but it had something raw underneath it. "That is not acceptable, and I am sorry." Amelia held the phone and felt something shift in her chest that she hadn't anticipated. Not triumph, not vindication, something quieter than both of those. "Thank you, Gerald," she said. "That means something. I wanted you to hear it before—" He stopped. "Before what?" "Before the board meeting this afternoon," he said. She sat up straighter. "What board meeting?" Gerald was quiet for a moment. "Luca called an emergency board meeting this morning, 2 hours ago." Another pause. "He has submitted a formal restructuring proposal. It includes the creation of a new oversight division, direct reporting to the board independent from the existing executive structure." Gerald's voice was careful now. "He named you as the proposed director of that division." Amelia did not say anything for exactly 4 seconds. "He what?" "He submitted it formally," Gerald said. "To the full board, with documentation. He also attached your professional history. The real one, beginning with your work at Hartfield Capital, including the fraud you identified there and the circumstances of your termination. He presented it to 14 board members this morning as evidence of your qualifications." She stood up from the table. She walked 3 steps in one direction, stopped, walked back. He did that without asking me, she said. Yes, Gerald said. Gerald, I have not agreed to any position. I have not agreed to anything. My resignation letter. He presented the resignation letter to the board as well, Gerald said, and she could hear in his voice the very specific discomfort of a man delivering information he is not entirely sure he should be delivering. He presented it as evidence that you had intended to leave because the organization had failed to recognize your value and that correcting that failure was a structural priority. Amelia put her hand on the counter. She stared at the wall. He presented my resignation letter, she said slowly, to his board of directors. Yes. As a case study. Essentially, yes. The silence that followed was the kind that had a great deal of activity inside it. When does the board meeting end? She said. It was scheduled for 3 hours. It started at 9. So, Gerald checked the time, approximately 45 minutes from now. Where? The 42nd floor conference room, at the main building. She looked at the box on the counter, at her mother's photograph. Thank you, Gerald, she said. She hung up. She stood in her kitchen for 30 seconds, completely still, running through the conversation at a speed that she usually reserved for documents. She was not angry, or rather she was angry, but the anger had a complicated texture to it, layered over something that was not anger at all, something that was closer to the feeling she had had the night before, when he said, I see you. A feeling she did not entirely trust, because it was not rational, and she had survived 8 years by being very, very rational. She picked up her phone. She called his number. He answered on the first ring. You presented my resignation letter to your board of directors, she said. Yes, he said, without asking me. You were unreachable. I was sitting in my kitchen. I didn't have a home number for my secretary. A pause. My former secretary. Luca. Amelia. She pressed her fingers against her forehead. You named me director of a division that does not yet exist in front of 14 board members for a position I have not accepted. The division will exist by end of business today, he said. The board approved it 11 minutes ago. She opened her mouth, closed it. The vote was 13-1, he said. Gerald abstained on the grounds of conflict of interest since you had spoken with him this morning. Everyone else voted yes. Who was the one? She asked before she could stop herself. Raymond Hess, he said. He said he needed more time to review the financial implications. Raymond Hess has been with the organization for 30 years, she said. He is meticulous but not obstructive. He will come around. That is exactly what Gerald said. She realized she had just told him how to manage a board member, which was not the position she had intended to be in at this moment in the conversation. You are unbelievable, she said. Probably, he said. Are you coming? I am not your employee. No, he said. You're the director of the new oversight division. Those are different things. I have not accepted that position. The board has approved it. The board does not get to decide what I do with my career. No, he said. But I'm asking you to come to this building and tell me that to my face. A pause. Because I would like to continue the conversation we started last night, and because 14 board members are about to walk out of a conference room and they will have questions I cannot answer as well as you can. Another pause. And because I think you want to come. She hated that the last part was true. She hated how precisely he had read that. I'll be there in 30 minutes, she said. I'll tell security to expect you. I know where security is, she said. I have worked in that building for 7 years. Right, he said. Of course. She hung up. She looked at the box on the counter for a moment. She picked up her mother's photograph. She put it in her bag. Then she walked out the door. The 42nd floor was not a floor she had spent much time on. The board conference room occupied most of it, along with a set of executive offices that were used for high-level meetings and the occasional visiting partner. The elevator opened, and she stepped out, and the first person she saw was Raymond Hess, who was 73 years old and had the bearing of a man who had been in serious rooms for 5 decades and was comfortable in all of them. He looked at her. You're Amelia Hart, he said. Yes. He studied her for a moment with the frank assessing look of a man who had very little patience for performance. I voted no, he said. I know. Not because I don't think you're qualified. Then why? Because Luca Moretti naming someone to a senior oversight role without their knowledge or consent is exactly the kind of unilateral decision-making that an oversight division should exist to check, he said. It seemed worth noting the irony. She looked at him. That is the most sensible thing I have heard anyone say about this situation, she said. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile. Something more considered than a smile. Come find me when you've sorted it out, he said. I'd like to hear your actual vision for the division, not the version Luca presented. That will require me to have agreed to run it, she said. Yes, he said. It will. He walked past her toward the elevator. She stood in the hallway for a moment, absorbing Raymond Hess's vote, no, and the specific complicated clarity it had produced in her, and then she walked toward the conference room. The door was open. Most of the board had already filtered out. Luca was standing at the head of the table talking to two of them. Men she recognized from organization filings, serious men with the compressed efficient energy of people who had somewhere else to be. He saw her in the doorway. He said something brief to the two men. They shook his hand and left. And then it was the two of them again. Same configuration as the night before. Different room. Raymond Hess thinks your proposal was itself an example of the problem it's meant to solve, she said. I know, Luca said. He told me in the meeting. He's right. I know that too. She walked into the room. She did not sit down. She stood on the opposite side of the table from him with her bag on her shoulder and her mother's photograph inside it and the accumulated energy of a morning that had not gone the way. Any morning she had planned in the past 8 years had gone. You cannot make decisions about my career without my input, she said. Even if the decisions are good decisions, even if the position is the right position, even if your intentions are entirely, she stopped recalibrated. Even if you are genuinely trying to do the right thing, you do not get to move me around the board without asking. That is not a partnership. That is a different version of the same problem. He did not argue. He did not deflect. You're right, he said. I know I'm right. I moved too fast, he said. I had 14 board members in a room and the proposal was ready and I thought... He stopped. I thought if I built the structure first, you would see that I was serious. I already knew you were serious. Did you? The question stopped her, because the honest answer was, she wasn't entirely sure. She had believed sitting in her kitchen that morning that the conversation at the Valenti Club had been real, that his apology had been genuine, that his ask had been sincere. But she had also spent 8 years in environments where powerful men said sincere things with complete authenticity, and then went back to doing exactly what was convenient for them. She had not been certain which kind of man Luca Moretti was. She was becoming more certain. I'm becoming sure, she said. Something moved in his face. That's honest, he said. I'm working on honest, she said, and she heard the echo of his own words from the night before come back through hers. He heard it too. He looked at her with an expression she was beginning to be able to read, not fully, not yet, but the outline of it. Something that wanted to be straightforward and wasn't entirely practiced at it. Sit down, she said. I want to talk about the division. He sat. She sat across from him. She pulled the folded piece of paper from her bag. She had written on it this morning at her kitchen table during the long stretch of sitting and thinking that had followed her call with Vincent. She unfolded it and placed it between them. He looked at it. You already drafted a structure, he said. I drafted a structure 6 weeks ago, she said. When I first began to understand the scope of the organizational vulnerabilities. I drafted it as a hypothetical because I didn't know yet whether there would be an organization left to apply it to. He looked at her. You were already planning this, he said slowly. The oversight division. I was planning to leave, she said. And I was also planning for the possibility that leaving might not be the right choice. I like to have more than one contingency. He looked at the paper for a long moment. This is more comprehensive than what I presented to the board this morning, he said. Yes, she said. You have reporting structures, independent audit protocols, whistleblower protection mechanisms, The whistleblower protections are non-negotiable, she said. Anyone in this organization who brings forward information about financial irregularities or misconduct needs to be protected structurally. Not just in policy. In actual practice with documented procedures and legal backstop. She looked at him steadily. Because the reason your organization had a Damien Russo problem for 14 months is the same reason I sat outside your conference room for 7 years. The people closest to the information had no protected channel to bring it forward. He read the paper carefully. She watched him. This part, he said, pointing to a section near the bottom. Independent reporting to the board. The oversight director does not report through the CEO. Correct, she said. That means you don't report to me. Correct. He looked at her. You'd have more authority than most of the executive team, he said. It was not a complaint. It was an observation. He was mapping it. The oversight function requires independence to be meaningful, she said. An oversight director who reports to the CEO is not oversight. It's a performance of oversight. Raymond Hess will vote yes for this version, he said. Raymond Hess will vote yes, and probably want to add 2 provisions, she said. Let him. His provisions will likely be improvements. Luca looked at her across the table. Are you accepting the position? He asked. She looked at the paper between them. She thought about the word her mother used to use, traction. When something finally had traction, her mother would say. When it finally started to grip and move forward instead of spinning. 8 years of work. One night at the Valenti Club. One morning in a kitchen. One piece of paper with a structure written on it at 6 in the morning by a woman who had spent 8 years being invisible and was done. There are conditions, she said. Name them. The Oversight Division operates independently. No interference, no pressure, no back-channel influence on our findings or recommendations. If we identify a problem, it goes to the board. Full stop. Agreed. My team is selected by me. I will consult with HR on process, but the final decision on personnel is mine. Agreed. My compensation reflects the actual scope of the role. I will have Gerald's office prepare a benchmark analysis. I am not negotiating against a secretary's salary. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Agreed, he said. And one more thing, she said. Tell me. She looked at him directly. The next time you make a decision that affects my career, you ask me first, before the board meeting, before the proposal is drafted, before anything is formally structured. She held his gaze. You ask me, in advance. That is the condition on which everything else works. He did not look away. Agreed, he said. And I'm sorry I didn't do that today. She looked at the paper. She looked at the table. She looked at him. Then yes, she said. I'm accepting the position. The room was quiet for a moment. Not the heavy, difficult quiet of the night before. Something lighter than that. Something that had space in it. There's one more thing, Luca said. She looked at him. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced the folded resignation letter. He placed it on the table between them. I believe this belongs to you, he said. She looked at it. You kept it, she said. I told you I wasn't going to accept it. You also said I could write another one. You can, he said. Anytime you want, no conditions. You can walk out of this organization any day you choose, and I will not do what I did this morning. I will not build a structure around you and call it an offer. He looked at the letter. I want you to have it back, because I want you to know that you are here because you chose to be, not because I arranged it. She picked up the resignation letter. She looked at it for a moment. Then she folded it and put it in her bag next to her mother's photograph. Not destroyed. Kept. Because she had learned in 8 years of careful work that documents mattered. That evidence mattered. That the paper record of a decision carried weight in ways that memory alone did not. She kept it because it was hers. And because walking through a door by choice was entirely different from being carried through it. I want to meet with Raymond Hess today, she said, before the close of business. I'll have his assistant reach out. And Gerald needs to begin the formal disclosure process with Vincent Carr's office. I want to be on that call. I'll set it for 4 o'clock. And the staff on the 14th floor. She stopped. He looked at her. The staff on the 14th floor, she said more carefully, have worked alongside me for 7 years without knowing who I actually was or what I was actually doing. When this investigation becomes public, some of them are going to feel they are going to have a complicated reaction to finding out. She paused. I want to talk to them myself, before it becomes news, before they read it somewhere. He was quiet for a moment. That matters to you, he said. They called me the office shadow, she said. But they also brought me coffee when I forgot to get my own. They covered my phone when I was in long meetings. They were not the people who diminished me. They were just the people who didn't see me clearly. She looked at him. There's a difference. He nodded slowly. Tell me when you want to do it, he said. I'll make sure the floor is clear. She stood. He stood. One more thing, she said. He raised an eyebrow. The joke, she said. Damien's joke, about bringing the secretary to the dinner. He held her gaze. I need you to understand what that joke cost, she said. Not just last night, all of it. 7 years of that joke in different forms every day. From different people. And you were the one person in that building who had the standing to stop it, and you sat at the head of that table and said nothing. She did not say it with anger. She said it with the specific, precise weight of something that needed to be said completely. I need you to understand that. Not apologize for it again. Understand it. So that when you build this new table, the one where people's voices matter, you know exactly what you are building it against. Luca Moretti stood very still, and she watched it move through him, not the surface processing of a powerful man, receiving feedback, but something deeper than that. The actual uncomfortable work of a person confronting a truth about themselves that is not flattering and choosing not to deflect it. I understand, he said. Not I will do better. Not it won't happen again. Not the future-facing statements that allowed people to move away from the present one. I understand. Present tense. She held it. Good, she said. She picked up her bag. She walked toward the door. Amelia, he said. She turned. He was standing at the head of the board table, the table where decisions were made, where power was exercised, where the Moretti organization's direction was set, and he looked for the first time since she had known him like a man who was genuinely uncertain what came next. Not lost. Uncertain. There was a difference. Thank you, he said, for coming back. She considered it for a moment. Don't thank me yet, she said. The investigation hasn't even started. The corner of his mouth moved. Raymond Hess said the same thing, he said. Raymond Hess, she said, is going to be very useful. She walked out, and behind her in the 42nd floor conference room, Luca Moretti stood at the head of a table that was about to look very different from anything it had ever been, and felt something settle in his chest that he did not immediately have a name for. Not control. Not the satisfaction of a deal closed or a problem solved. Something harder to categorize and more durable than either of those things. Something that felt, if he were being precise about it, like the beginning of actually deserving what he had spent 20 years building. Down the hall the elevator opened. Amelia stepped inside. She pressed the button for the 14th floor, because there were people there who deserved to hear it from her first. And she had always in the end known exactly what the right thing to do was. That had never been the question. The question had always been whether anyone was finally ready to listen. Today, for the first time in 8 years, the answer was yes. The 14th floor was exactly as she had left it the day before. Same desks, same phones, same hum of an office in midday motion. 3 people looked up when the elevator opened. Then 4 more. Then everyone one by one in the quiet domino effect of an office noticing something it didn't expect. Amelia Hart stood at the elevator and looked at the faces of people she had worked alongside for 7 years. People who had passed her in hallways without registering her presence. People who had handed her files and coffee orders and phone messages with the automatic courtesy extended to useful furniture. People who had in small and large ways participated in a version of her that was not real. Not because they were cruel, but because she had built that version and handed it to them, and they had accepted it without question, because nobody thinks to question the shadow. She had counted them this morning sitting at her kitchen table before the calls began. 11 people on the 14th floor, who had known her in some capacity for most of her 7 years. She knew all of their names. She knew which ones took their coffee black. She knew who was saving for a daughter's college tuition, and who was 3 months from paying off a car loan, and who cried quietly in the women's restroom on the third Thursday of every month, for reasons that were none of her business, but that she had noted because she noted everything. She had spent 7 years knowing them in ways they did not know her. That was about to change. "I need 5 minutes," she said to the floor in general. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. She walked to the center of the room where the shared work tables clustered, and she stood in the space where she had spent years being invisible, and she told them the truth. Not all of it. Not the parts that were still under federal review. Not the names that would be handled through legal channels. But the shape of it, what she had actually been doing. Why she had built the version of herself she had handed them, what the folder contained in general terms, and what was going to happen next with the organization. She told them about the oversight division. She told them she would be running it. She told them that anyone on this floor who had information, anything they had noticed, and dismissed anything they had observed and not known what to do with anything, they had told themselves was not their place to raise, could come to her. Directly. With protection. When she finished, the room was very quiet. Marcus Webb, who had worked the desk closest to hers for 5 years and who had brought her coffee every single morning without exception, said, "You speak French." She looked at him. "At the dinner last night," he said. He had clearly already heard something. Word moved fast in this building. "You corrected their translation." "I speak 4 languages," she said. Marcus stared at her. "You ordered my lunch in English for 5 years," he said. "I ordered your lunch in whatever language was most efficient for the task," she said. "That's—" He stopped. Shook his head. Made a sound that was half disbelief and half something that might eventually become admiration. "That's wild." "Yes," she said. "I imagine it is." Diane Chu, who handled executive scheduling, and who had never once addressed Amelia directly about anything that wasn't directly work-related, raised her hand like she was in a classroom. "You were investigating the whole time," Diane said. "I was doing my job the whole time," Amelia said. "The investigation was part of what I found when I was doing my job." "Did you know about Damien Russo from the beginning?" "No," she said honestly. "Damien's involvement became clear about 4 months ago. Before that, I was looking at other threads." "What other threads?" "Some of those threads are part of an ongoing federal investigation," she said. "I can't discuss the specifics yet, but eventually some of you will be asked questions by investigators. If that happens, you answer honestly. Everything you know. Don't protect the organization out of habit. Protect yourselves by telling the truth." She looked around the room. "That is always the right call." Marcus was still looking at her with the expression of a man trying to fit a new piece into a puzzle he thought he had already solved. "Were you?" he started carefully. "Were you happy here doing it this way?" The question surprised her. Not because it was strange. Because it was real. Because Marcus Webb, who had brought her coffee every morning for 5 years, was asking her a human question rather than a professional one, and she had not prepared for that. She thought about it honestly. "Parts of it," she said. "The work itself, finding patterns, following evidence, understanding how an organization actually functions from the inside. Yes, I was happy doing that." She paused. The invisibility was not happiness. It was a strategy. And strategies that work can become habits, and habits can become a kind of... She stopped. You can tell yourself you chose something for so long that you forget to check whether you still want it. Marcus nodded slowly. "I should have seen you better," he said. "You brought me coffee every morning," she said. "That counted for something." His expression shifted into something she had never seen on his face in 5 years. Something uncomplicated and warm. "From tomorrow," he said, "you're getting the good coffee, not the floor blend." She felt something loosen in her chest. "I'd appreciate that," she said. She looked around the room one more time. "I'm going to be on this floor in a different capacity," she said. "I want to be clear that the Oversight Division is not here to watch you. It's here to create the kind of organization where what happened in the past 14 months cannot happen again. Where the people closest to the ground, the ones who see the daily details, have somewhere to bring what they see." She looked at them steadily. "You are those people, and I am asking you to trust that I mean it." Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Diane Chu said simply, "Okay." And somehow that one word from the woman who had never addressed her directly about anything landed with more weight than any board resolution or formal agreement could have produced. "Okay," Amelia said back. She walked to the elevator. The 4 o'clock call with Vincent Carr and Gerald Park lasted 2 hours and 17 minutes and covered the full scope of the Federal Cooperation Agreement, the disclosure documents, the timeline of the investigation, the specific protections for Moretti Corporation, employees who provided truthful testimony, and the parameters of the parallel Hartfield capital case that Vincent's office had been building for 3 years. At one point, Vincent said, "The Hartfield partners are going to argue that the statute of limitations on the original fraud has run." "They're wrong," Amelia said. "The intermediary accounts were active as recently as 14 months ago. The scheme was ongoing. The statute runs from the last active transaction." Gerald, who had been listening to this exchange from across the table with the expression of a man watching a chess match, played at a speed he could barely follow, said, "She's right. I already had our legal team run that question this morning." Vincent said, "I know she's right. I wanted to hear her say it." "Why?" Amelia said. "Because in 3 years of building this case, I never had the person who found the original thread available to walk me through it in real time." She could hear him smiling through the phone. 8 years ago, if they hadn't buried your career, you would have handed this to us directly, and we'd have had it wrapped up in 18 months. 8 years ago, I would have handed it to the wrong people," she said. "I handed it to my supervisor, and he buried it in 48 hours. You would have found your way to us eventually." "Maybe," she said. "But I found my way here instead. And what I found here turned out to be larger than what I was originally looking for." A brief silence. "Amelia," Vincent said, "for what it's worth, the work you did over 7 years, the way you built this case while maintaining your cover, the completeness of the evidentiary record. I have been doing this job for 31 years, and I have never seen anything like it, from anyone." She held the phone very still. "Thank you, Vincent," she said. After the call ended, Gerald sat across from her in the conference room for a moment without speaking. Then he said, "The board wants a formal presentation of the Oversight Division's structure next Tuesday. Full board. Raymond Hess specifically requested that you present it yourself, not through Luca." "That's appropriate," she said. "Raymond also sent you a note." Gerald slid a folded piece of paper across the table. She opened it. It read in handwriting that was precise and slightly old-fashioned. "Miss Hart, I have spent 30 years watching this organization make the same category of mistake in different forms. I voted no this morning because the process was wrong. I would vote yes 100 times for the outcome. Please don't let him rush you. Good things are worth building carefully. R. Hess." She folded the note and put it in her bag next to her mother's photograph and her resignation letter. She was running out of room in that bag. Gerald stood to leave. At the door he stopped. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Yes." "All those times you put documents in front of us, the shipping reports, the contract flags, the quarterly discrepancies, did you know we weren't fully processing them?" She considered the question honestly. "I knew you were processing them insufficiently," she said. "I didn't always know whether that was because you couldn't see what I was seeing, or because you didn't want to. And now I know it was the former," she said. "For most of you." Gerald nodded. "I wish I had been better," he said. "You're being better now," she said. "That's the part that matters going forward." He left. She sat in the conference room alone for a moment. She thought about 8 years. She thought about the careful, disciplined, sometimes lonely work of building something that nobody could see, because the moment anyone saw it, the thing itself would be destroyed. She thought about all the rooms she had sat in as furniture, All the conversations she had absorbed without contributing. All the mornings she had woken up and put on the clothes of a person smaller than she was, and gone to work and done it anyway, day after day, because the goal was worth the cost. She thought about whether the cost had been worth it. The answer was not as simple as yes, but it was not no either. It was something more complex and more honest than either of those clean answers. Something that acknowledged the real weight of 8 years of strategic invisibility, while also acknowledging that the weight had produced something, that the discipline had built something, that the thing she had built was now going to matter to people she had not yet met. People who would come to this organization in future years and find a structure that protected them in ways no structure had protected her. That was worth something. That was worth quite a lot. Her phone buzzed. "Are you still in the building?" She looked at the message. "Fourth floor conference room," she typed back. 3 minutes later, the door opened. Luca came in and sat across from her exactly as he had the night before. Exactly as he had that morning. And she thought that there was something almost structural about the way they kept returning to this configuration. Two people on opposite sides of a table working out the terms of something neither of them had a complete map for. "How was the call with Vincent?" he said. "Productive," she said. "The cooperation agreement is solid. Gerald was excellent. Gerald has spent the last 24 hours having the most professionally clarifying experience of his career," Luca said. "Good," she said. "It shows." Luca looked at the table. He had that look again, the one she was learning to read, the one that appeared when he was about to say something he hadn't entirely rehearsed. "I want to ask you something," he said. "You're asking first," she noted. "Progress." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. "Progress," he agreed. "I want to ask you something that is not about the organization." She looked at him. "The dinner tonight," he said. "The private one. Not the Valenti Club. Not a room full of people. Just—" he paused. "I'd like to have dinner with you. Not to discuss the oversight division. Not to review documents. Just dinner." The room was quiet. Amelia Hart sat across from Luca Moretti and felt the specific careful attention of a woman who had spent 8 years being extraordinarily precise about the difference between what was in front of her and what she wanted to be in front of her. She looked at him. Not the assessment. Not the 7-year habit of reading him, strategically mapping his reactions, cataloging his expressions for professional use. She looked at him the way she would look at anything she was genuinely trying to understand openly, without a predetermined conclusion. He was watching her with an expression that was not calculation. It was something she did not yet have a full name for. But she recognized its texture. It was the expression of a man who was asking for something he actually wanted, rather than something he had decided he should want, and who was uncertain enough about the answer to be genuinely vulnerable in the asking. She had seen that expression on very few people in her life. Her mother asking her whether it was all right to sell the house after her father left. A colleague at Hartfield. The week before, Amelia was fired, asking whether she thought the firm was really as solid as everyone was pretending it was. People who were being honest at some cost to themselves. "Is this you asking?" she said. "Or you deciding and then framing it as asking?" He held her gaze. "This is me asking," he said. "And if the answer is no, I will accept that without building a structure around it." She looked at him for a long moment. "Do you know what the hardest part of the past 7 years was?" she said. He waited. "Not the invisibility," she said. "Not the meetings where I was furniture. Not even the years before when they destroyed my professional record." She paused. "The hardest part was being in the same room as a person I found genuinely interesting every single day, and not being able to say a real word to them. Because the strategy required distance. Because the work required me to remain someone he never looked at closely enough to actually see." She looked at the table. "That was the cost I didn't fully calculate when I started." The room was completely still. "I saw you," he said. "I was simply too careless to look." "There's a difference between those two things," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm asking you to let me correct it." She looked at him for one more moment. "Dinner," she said. "Not a meeting, not a strategy session." "Just dinner," he said. And if I find it professionally relevant to discuss the Tuesday presentation, then we discuss it, he said. And it will still be dinner. She stood. He stood. 7 o'clock, she said. I'll choose the place. You have controlled enough rooms for 1 week. He smiled. It was a real smile, not the calibrated social expression she had catalogued 7 years worth of, but something more unguarded than that. Something that reached his eyes and changed the whole structure of his face in a way she had not seen before. She filed it. Not strategically, just because it was worth remembering. She walked toward the door. Amelia, he said. She turned. The place you choose, he said. Is it somewhere you've wanted to go, or somewhere you think I should experience? She considered it. Both, she said. There's a restaurant on Cornelia Street that's been there for 40 years. The owner is a woman in her 80s who still cooks Tuesday through Saturday. The food is extraordinary, and the tables are too close together, and it is nothing like the Valenti Club. He looked at her with the expression she was still learning to read. It sounds perfect, he said. It is, she said. I've been going there alone on Sunday evenings for 6 years. She paused. I always thought it deserved better company. She walked out, and something settled in the air of that conference room. Not resolution, not the clean full stop of a finished chapter, but something more alive than that. The particular energy of a door that has been opened deliberately by someone who knows what they are doing and has decided that what's on the other side is worth stepping toward. 6 weeks later, the Federal Financial Crimes Division announced a 14-count indictment against 3 former Hartfield Capital partners and 2 associated entities, citing a fraud scheme dating back 11 years and totaling over $60 million across multiple connected organizations. Damian Russo entered into a cooperation agreement with prosecutors that would require him to testify in both cases. The Bertolini Group's U.S. operating license was suspended pending investigation. Michel Fontaine flew back to Geneva without comment and did not return. The Moretti Corporation's cooperation was noted publicly by the lead federal prosecutor as comprehensive, proactive, and materially instrumental to the successful development of the case. That language had been negotiated carefully over 2 weeks of calls between Gerald Park and Vincent Carr's office, with Amelia present on every call. Raymond Hess voted yes on the Oversight Division's formal charter on a Tuesday morning in a board meeting that lasted 45 minutes. He also added 2 provisions. Both of them were improvements. Marcus Webb started bringing Amelia the good coffee the morning after her conversation with the 14th floor. He brought it to her new office on the 19th floor, which was not adjacent to anyone else's office, and had 2 windows and a desk, large enough to hold the kind of work she was now doing openly, without pretense, without the careful architecture of invisibility. The small box from her old desk sat on the corner of the new one. Her mother's photograph faced the window. The resignation letter stayed in her bag. Not because she was uncertain, because it was hers. Because she had written it, and signed it, and carried it across the city, on a night that changed everything, and it was part of the record of who she was and what she had chosen, and what that choosing had cost and produced. She did not need to look at it. She simply needed to know it was there. On a Thursday evening in late autumn, 6 months after the night at the Valenti Club, Amelia sat at a small table on Cornelia Street across from Luca Moretti. And the restaurant was warm, and the tables were close together, and the owner came out of the kitchen to say hello, because Amelia had been coming here alone for 6 years, and the woman had decided approximately 3 visits into the new arrangement that she approved of the change. She called you serious, Amelia said after the owner went back to the kitchen. She called me seriously in need of better restaurants, Luca said. Those are the same thing in her vocabulary. He smiled, the real one. The one she had stopped filing and started simply receiving. The Tuesday board meeting, he said. We're not talking about the board meeting, she said. You brought it up last week at dinner. I brought it up because you asked a direct question, and I answered it. That was professional relevance. This is dinner. She looked at him levelly. Those are different categories, and you agreed to the distinction. I did agree to that, he said. You're learning, she said. Slowly, he said. Faster than you think, she said, and she meant it. They were quiet for a moment in the comfortable way of people who have stopped needing to fill space. Can I ask you something? He said. Not about the organization. Yes. The 6 years you came here alone, he said. Sunday evenings. Did you ever imagine? He stopped, started more carefully. Did you ever let yourself want something different? She looked at the table. Honest answer. The real one, not the managed one. I told myself I didn't, she said. I was very disciplined about telling myself that. The plan required a kind of narrowness. Focus. If you start wanting things outside the plan gets complicated. She looked at him. But wanting things outside the plan and not letting yourself think about them are not the same as not wanting them. He held that. What did you want? He said. She looked at him across the table, the man who had stood up without realizing he was doing it twice in a room full of people who had come to watch her feel small. The man who had folded her resignation letter and put it in his jacket pocket and refused to let it be an ending. The man who had asked, genuinely asked, when he could have simply arranged. This, she said, simply, without qualification or strategic framing or the careful management of expectation. Just the word, just the truth. He looked at her with the expression that still moved through her chest, in a way she had stopped trying to categorize and started simply acknowledging. So did I, he said. I just didn't know what I was looking at. You were looking at me, she said. You simply weren't seeing me. I see you now, he said. I know, she said. I can tell. Outside the city moved around them loud and indifferent, and completely unaware of the conversation happening at a small table in a 40-year-old restaurant on Cornelia Street, where a woman who had spent 8 years being invisible was sitting across from a man who had finally completely learned how to look. The owner came back with 2 small plates. She had not ordered something from the kitchen, she said, because it was a good evening, and good evenings deserved something extra. Amelia thanked her. She looked at the plate. She looked at the man across from her. She thought about her mother, who had made something from nothing, using the ability to see what other people missed. Who had called it common sense. Who was in a photograph on the corner of a desk on the 19th floor of a building where a woman who had once been furniture was now building something that would outlast any of the people who had tried to make her small. She thought about the resignation letter in her bag. She thought about the table where she had been invited because her voice mattered. She was sitting at it. She had built it herself. And the woman who had spent 8 years waiting to be seen had finally completely on her own terms, without compromise or concession, or the managed smallness of a strategy that had served its purpose and been set down, stepped into the full light of who she had always been. She had never